I think there were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range of organisations.
3 minutes ago, the monarchy crossed a line no one expected King Charles to touch. Behind closed doors, with only a trusted aide nearby, the king placed his signature on a private order that moved Balmoral's sealed estate records into Princess Anne's hands. It was not a speech. It was not a ceremony. It was one stroke of ink that changed the balance of trust inside the royal family. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles did not look victorious when the pen left the page. He remained seated, staring at the sealed file, as though the weight of Balmoral itself had been placed before him. A private order, in plain words, is an instruction signed away from public ceremony, meant to give quiet legal force to a decision the palace does not want debated in open rooms. Balmoral's sealed estate records meant the protected archive of family property, inheritance notes, household decisions, and old instructions tied to the royal residence in Scotland. The king understood what he had done. He had not simply allowed Anne to read history, he had given her the power to question it. Anne received the news without a smile. She stood still as the message was delivered, her expression calm, but her silence said everything. The Princess Royal knew Balmoral was never just a house. It was where private grief had been hidden behind duty, where family memories had been locked away, and where decisions made in quiet rooms had shaped lives beyond the castle walls. She understood why Charles had chosen her. She also understood why others would feel betrayed. Camilla would not be able to ignore it. William would not be able to treat it as routine. Senior aides would not be able to pretend it was harmless administration. The Queen Consort, the Prince, and the palace officials had all expected certain matters to pass through familiar hands before reaching anyone else. Instead, Anne's name now sat directly beside the sealed records, and that changed the temperature inside every private conversation. The order bypassed expectation. It challenged comfort. It suggested that Charles no longer believed trust could be assumed. The closed file became a warning. Anne could now review, protect, and challenge how sensitive estate decisions had been handled. That meant missing notes could be questioned. Old instructions could be traced. Quiet choices could be pulled back into the light. Charles knew this would wound people close to him, but he signed anyway. The monarchy had survived many storms, but this one began with silence, ink, and a sister handed the key to a past others wanted left untouched. And before anyone could understand why Charles had chosen Anne, the question became far more dangerous. Who had he decided not to trust? The order did not land in an empty palace. It landed inside a family already carrying bruises, old loyalties, and quiet suspicions. Charles saw duty. Anne saw responsibility. William saw risk. Camilla saw exclusion. And in that single morning, Balmoral's sealed records became more than papers hidden behind old locks. They became a mirror, showing exactly where power now sat. Charles knew this decision would not stay quiet for long. He had signed as a monarch, but he felt the cost as a man surrounded by people who would read meaning into every line. A monarch, in simple words, is the ruling king or queen who carries the final royal authority. For Charles, that authority now meant preserving control while admitting that certain matters had grown too heavy to remain untouched. Balmoral mattered because it was tied to family memory, royal property, and private choices that could still shape the future. If those records stayed sealed forever, suspicion would only grow stronger. Anne understood the burden immediately. She was not chosen because she was soft. She was chosen because she could stand firm when everyone else wanted comfort. The sealed records, meaning protected papers kept away from normal review, were believed to hold old estate instructions, private household notes, restricted correspondence, and decisions once considered too sensitive for wider royal eyes. Anne knew that opening even one part of that history could protect the crown, but it could also reopen wounds the family had spent years trying to cover. Camilla heard the news from a private secretary and did not move. Her hand tightened around the arm of her chair, slowly, painfully, as the meaning settled inside her. The queen consort understood that Anne had been trusted with something she had not been given. Camilla did not need anyone to explain the insult. She could feel it in the quiet. Charles had not removed her from his side, but he had drawn a private line around Balmoral's deepest records, and she was standing outside it. William chose his words carefully when he spoke with Catherine. The prince did not call the order wrong, but he did not call it safe either. He told the princess that Anne's access could protect the family from hidden damage, or expose wounds no one was ready to face. Catherine listened closely, sensing the fear beneath his calm voice. William knew that once the past was questioned, the future could not pretend nothing had changed. Charles's decision revealed something colder than anger. He believed the monarchy could not move forward until someone strong enough looked backward. Anne had been chosen for that painful role, and every person connected to Balmoral now had to wonder what she might find. To understand why Charles reached for Anne now, the palace had to return to the night when Balmoral stopped feeling like a sanctuary. There was one moment, months before the private order, that changed everything. It was not a public scandal or a balcony mistake. It happened during a restricted Balmoral estate review, when a sealed ledger was brought into a small room, and Charles noticed a missing entry where a crucial family instruction should have been. From that silence, the entire crisis began. Charles had expected discomfort, not discovery. The Balmoral Restricted Ledger Review was a private meeting created to examine old estate entries tied to property, inheritance, and family authority. A ledger, in simple words, is an official record book where important decisions are listed so they can be traced later. For the king, this mattered because Balmoral was not just land and walls. It carried family promises, private grief, and instructions that could affect who controlled parts of the royal legacy. Anne noticed the change in him before anyone spoke. Charles looked down at the estate record index, then across the table at her, and the Princess Royal understood his face at once. This was not confusion. This was recognition mixed with dread. The estate record index, meaning the list that shows where each sealed entry should appear, had a broken reference number where one page should have been. That empty mark was small, but its meaning was enormous. Someone had removed a piece of the past. Charles did not accuse anyone. He simply kept staring at the gap, as if silence could put the missing page back. Anne leaned closer, read the number again, and her voice changed. She asked for the room to be cleared. The two estate officials left without argument, and when the door closed, the air between brother and sister turned cold. Anne told Charles that missing records do not vanish by accident. She did not soften the words. She knew he needed truth, not comfort. Charles wanted time, but time was already turning against him. The missing entry was believed to connect to a sealed estate instruction involving Balmoral's private holdings, and the question of who had authority to preserve them. Private holdings, in plain language, means royal property or assets kept under family control rather than normal public business. That made the missing page dangerous. If the instruction had been altered, hidden, or removed, then decisions built on it could be questioned. Anne watched him struggle with what came next. Charles understood that giving her access would protect the archive, but it would also admit the archive might have been compromised. The king delayed because the truth carried a price. Once he moved, Camilla would feel excluded, William would see risk, and Anne would become the person others feared. The delay ended when one confrontation forced Charles to choose between family comfort and royal accountability. And when the truth finally moved from a locked room into a living argument, Balmoral's silence broke. with a voice Charles could no longer ignore. The confrontation came without ceremony. Anne entered Charles's private room, carrying no drama, no audience, and no patience left for delay. The king was standing by the desk when she placed the copied index before him. No raised voice was needed. The empty line did all the shouting. In that moment, brother and sister stopped speaking like royals and began speaking like survivors of the same family burden. Anne had done the work quietly, and that made her discovery harder to dismiss. She had compared the restricted ledger index against older references, and found that the missing page was not an administrative mistake. A restricted ledger index, in simple words, is a protected list showing where sensitive records should be stored, and how each entry connects to the next. For Charles, that mattered because every future Balmoral decision could be questioned if one hidden gap remained unexplained. If the archive could not be trusted, the authority built on it could not feel safe. Charles looked at the copied index and pushed the file away. The movement was small, but the wound behind it was clear. He was not rejecting Anne, he was rejecting what her discovery meant. The king had spent his life inside a system built on order, loyalty, and quiet obedience. Now his own sister was placing proof before him that someone had moved around that system. Anne did not flinch. She knew his pain was real, but she also knew pain could not become an excuse. Anne looked directly at him and told him loyalty did not mean protecting silence once silence became dangerous. Her words landed hard because they came from love, not ambition. Charles heard the accusation beneath the warning, and it cut deeper than anger. He understood that Anne was not asking for privilege. She was demanding authority to prevent more damage before Balmoral's sealed history became a weapon inside the family. Anne then revealed the detail Charles had feared. Through a documented account prepared from estate access logs, she had found that the removed entry had been requested twice before by someone outside the normal estate review process. Estate access logs, in plain language, are records showing who asked to view, move, or check protected documents. That meant the missing page had not simply disappeared into confusion. Someone had wanted it, someone had reached for it, and someone had done so without passing through the usual trusted line. Charles went still. The king no longer had the comfort of delay. If he left Anne powerless, the gap would remain. If he gave her authority, the palace would know he believed the old locks had failed. That was the moment the decision formed, not out of panic, not out of revenge, out of fear for what silence could become. The moment Charles stopped resisting Anne, the palace machinery started moving, and those who had relied on locked doors began to feel them opening. Power inside the monarchy rarely announces itself with noise. It moves through wording, access, signatures, and timing. Charles knew this better than anyone. That is why the order was written privately, reviewed quietly, and signed before resistance could gather strength. But behind the careful language was something deeply human. A king, deciding that his sister's judgment mattered more than palace comfort. Charles read the final wording twice. A senior aide stood nearby, silent, watching the king pause when Anne's name appeared in the document. The private order, meaning a signed instruction made away from public ceremony, gave her a defined role over Balmoral's sealed estate records. Those records mattered because they held protected family papers tied to property, inheritance, private instructions, and decisions that could affect the future shape of royal control. Once Anne became guardian of access, review, and preservation, no quiet hand could move through the archive as easily as before. Anne was chosen because Charles trusted her discipline more than anyone's comfort. She had never been the royal who softened hard truths to keep a room calm. She was loyal to the institution, meaning the crown itself, and the duties that hold it together, not to personal factions or private pressure. That mattered deeply now. If Balmoral's records had gaps, removals, or broken references, the king needed someone who could ask hard questions without bending. Anne could do that. Anne would do that. Charles set the pen down after signing, but relief never reached his face. The aide saw the change in him. The monarch looked like a man who had protected something larger while wounding someone close. He knew Camilla would feel the decision. He knew William would study it carefully. He knew the palace would understand what the wording truly meant. This was not just permission for Anne to read old papers. This was authority. This was control being redirected. The order limited informal access to the sealed records. In plain words, that meant private influence could no longer move around official channels, whispering requests, opening folders, or closing questions without a trace. The language also gave Anne the right to demand explanations for missing entries, removed pages, or irregular references inside the estate archive. That single clause changed everything. It meant silence could be challenged. It meant the past could be forced to answer. Charles understood the risk as soon as the ink dried. The king had strengthened Balmoral's protection, but he had also exposed a private fracture inside the family. Anne now held the keys to the sealed past, and anyone who had depended on locked doors had reason to fear her calm hands. Power had shifted without a public word, and when Camilla learned that Anne now held the keys to Balmoral's sealed past, the fallout began not in public, but behind one closed door. Camilla did not shout when the news reached her. That made the moment more unsettling. She sat in a private sitting room, listening as the words were delivered carefully, almost gently, as though gentleness could soften humiliation. Anne had been given the sealed records. Charles had signed it, and no one had asked the queen consort to approve what had already been done. Camilla understood the wound before anyone explained the wording. The order was not ceremonial, meaning it was not just a symbolic royal gesture made for appearance. It changed who could see, question, and protect Balmoral's restricted estate history. That mattered because those records were tied to private family decisions, old property instructions, and sensitive household matters that could still shape power inside the monarchy. For the queen consort, the pain was not only about documents. It was about being close to Charles in public, yet kept outside one of his most private decisions. Camilla asked one quiet question. Did William know before she did? The private secretary did not answer quickly enough, and that pause gave her everything. The prince may not have controlled the decision, but she sensed he understood the risk before she had even been told. Camilla's hand tightened, then relaxed, as if she was forcing herself not to show how sharply the answer had landed. She had survived judgment before. She had endured whispers before. But this felt different. This felt like a door closing from the inside. Charles entered later, with the heaviness of a man who already knew the damage had been done. The king did not arrive angry, and he did not arrive weak. He arrived carrying the cost of his own signature. Camilla looked at him and told him calmly that being informed after Anne felt like being pushed outside the family circle. Her voice did not break. That made it worse. Charles heard the hurt beneath every controlled word, but he did not take the order back. Charles explained that Balmoral's records had to be handled by someone no one could accuse of seeking advantage. The sealed estate, in simple words, was the protected part of Balmoral's family archive, where private royal instructions and ownership records were kept away from ordinary access. The king said Anne had the discipline to review it without emotion, pressure, or personal gain. Camilla heard the explanation, but she also heard the message inside it. Affection could remain. Authority had moved elsewhere. Camilla realized then that Charles had not chosen against her heart. He had chosen beyond it. That was the colder truth. The monarchy had demanded a guardian, and Anne had been given the burden. The queen consort was still beside the king, but Balmoral's sealed past now belonged to another woman's judgment. After Camilla's pain settled into silence, Charles faced the one person who could carry the burden he had finally released. The turning point did not come through a formal announcement. It came in a private room, where Charles and Anne sat across from each other, with no aides, no secretaries, and no protective language between them. For once, the monarchy fell away. There was only a brother handing his sister a burden, and a sister deciding whether duty still had the power to hurt her. Charles gave Anne the sealed access packet himself. His hand moved slowly, not because he doubted the decision, but because he understood what it would cost her. The sealed access packet, in simple words, was the official set of permissions allowing her to open, review, and question Balmoral's protected estate records. It mattered because this was no longer just palace paperwork. It was family history placed under one woman's control, and every answer Anne found could hurt someone still standing close to the king. Anne did not reach for it at once. She looked at Charles first, reading the regret in his face, before reading the authority in the document. The Princess Royal knew what acceptance meant. She would become responsible for truths others might resent her for uncovering. She would carry the blame for questions Charles had delayed. She would be seen as cold by those who wanted comfort, and dangerous by those who depended on silence. Still, Anne did not step back. Charles admitted what he had avoided saying before. He told Anne he had waited too long after the missing ledger entry, and the words left him heavier than any command. A ledger entry, in plain language, means a recorded line showing that an important decision or instruction exists in the archive. That missing line had become the crack under Balmoral's sealed door. Anne's expression softened when she heard his regret. She was still firm, but for a moment, she was only his sister. Anne told him she would not protect anyone's pride, not even his, if the records revealed mistakes that needed correcting. Charles accepted that without argument. The king knew this was why he had chosen her. Not because she would protect him from embarrassment, but because she would protect the monarchy from rot. Anne made it clear that her role was not revenge against Camilla, not a warning to William, and not a power grab. It was a final safeguard around Balmoral's integrity. Charles then gave her the one instruction that mattered most. Preserve what is true, not what is convenient. Anne held the packet after that, and the room seemed to change. The burden had passed. The silence had a new owner. Charles looked older, but lighter. Anne looked steady, but wounded by the weight she had agreed to carry. What had begun as a sealed family decision now moved beyond palace walls, and the country saw Balmoral not as a home, but as a vault. By morning, the story had escaped the corridors. It was no longer only about Charles, Anne, Camilla, or William. It belonged to the public imagination. Balmoral, once wrapped in mist and memory, was suddenly framed as the center of a royal power shift. And one newspaper front page captured the entire mood with brutal simplicity. A dark image of the castle gates under the headline, "Anne Gets the Keys." William watched the morning coverage without speaking. The prince did not react to the noise first. He reacted to the meaning beneath it. The palace response had confirmed that Anne had been granted a special review role over Balmoral's sealed estate records, while insisting the move was about preservation and continuity. A palace response, in simple words, is the official wording released to explain a royal decision without revealing every private detail behind it. That mattered because the family could no longer pretend this was only internal housekeeping. The public now understood that something serious had shifted. Catherine sat near him as the broadcasters repeated the same phrase again and again. Balmoral was no longer being described only as a beloved royal home. It was being called a vault of private authority, a place where family trust and royal control had collided. William finally turned to Catherine and said the monarchy could survive anger, but not uncertainty over its own records. The princess heard the fear in his calm voice. He was not defending secrecy. He was defending stability. Because once people began doubting the foundation, every future decision became harder to hold. Camilla saw the front page later and turned it face down. The gesture was small, but it carried all the hurt she refused to say aloud. The Queen Consort knew the headline made Anne look powerful and made her look excluded. Charles had acted for the crown, but the public story had turned the decision into a judgment on trust. Camilla understood that images can wound more deeply than statements, because people remember the symbol long after they forget the explanation. Outside Balmoral's gates, a small crowd gathered quietly. No one needed to shout. Their silence made the moment stranger. The castle had become a symbol of hidden royal history, and every person standing there seemed to know that sealed records meant more than paper. A veteran broadcaster described the order as a family decision with constitutional echoes. Constitutional echoes, in plain words, meant a private royal act that could still affect how people understood power, duty, and authority inside the monarchy. Charles heard that phrase repeated across discussion panels, and the king understood the storm had changed shape. Anne had been given a duty. Camilla had felt a wound. William had seen the risk, and the public had found its own meaning. When the cameras moved on and the headlines began to fade, the emotional truth of the decision remained inside the family that had been changed by it. In the end, the private order was not just about Balmoral's sealed estate records. It was about trust, restraint, and the painful price of protecting a crown built on memory. Charles did not choose the easiest path. Anne did not receive an honor. Camilla did not merely suffer embarrassment. William did not simply observe. Each of them was forced to face what duty demands when comfort is no longer enough. Charles's signature became the defining act of the entire story. The private order, in simple words, was a signed instruction made away from public ceremony, but carrying real power inside royal decision-making. It mattered, because the king had separated personal feeling from institutional responsibility. He knew the order would hurt Camilla. He knew Anne would carry blame for whatever came next. He knew William would understand the risk. Still, Charles chose the crown over comfort, because Balmoral's sealed past could no longer remain protected by silence alone. Anne's authority gave the monarchy something it badly needed: a firm guardian. Balmoral's sealed records, meaning protected family papers tied to estate choices, private instructions, inheritance matters, and household history, now rested with someone trusted to face truth without bending. The Princess Royal did not accept the role like a prize. She accepted it like a burden. Anne understood that loyalty was not measured by staying quiet when something looked wrong. Her loyalty was now measured by courage under pressure. Camilla's pain revealed the human cost of the decision. The Queen Consort had remained close to Charles in public, but this order showed that closeness and authority were not always the same thing. She had not been removed from his life, but she had been kept outside a deeply private part of Balmoral's future. That wound mattered, because monarchy is not only built on rules. It is built on trust, and trust can break quietly, long before the public hears a word. William saw the deeper lesson with painful clarity. The prince understood that the monarchy survives not by hiding every fracture, but by choosing who is strong enough to protect what remains. He knew Anne's role might cause discomfort, but he also knew uncertainty was more dangerous than anger. If the family could not trust its own records, then every future decision would carry doubt, and doubt, once it enters the crown, does not leave easily. Charles was left with sadness, not victory. Anne was left with duty, not celebration. Camilla was left with hurt, not defeat. William was left with a warning, not a simple answer. The verdict is complete. The private order did not weaken the monarchy. It forced the family to confront its own shadows. And in giving Anne the sealed records, the king chose duty over comfort, truth over peace, and the future over fear. There is no unfinished question left here. Only the heavy truth that Balmoral's sealed past now rests with the one royal who was strong enough to carry it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.